Kicked out at 17, he bought an old Case tractor for $75. What it became, and what he discovered because of it, would change the entire course of his life. If you've ever felt lost and wondered if there was a second chance waiting for you somewhere, then you're in the right place. Stick with me, hit that subscribe button, because this story is for anyone who's had to build a home from the ground up. The air in Mr. Henderson's office always smelled the same: stale coffee, cheap disinfectant, and the faint, papery scent of hopelessness. It was the smell of the system. I'd been breathing it in for 6 years, ever since my mom died, and today, on my 17th birthday, it felt thicker than ever. I sat in the plastic chair, the one with the crack in the seat that always pinched, and watched him shuffle papers on his desk. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That was never a good sign. "Leo," he began, his voice trying for gentle, but landing on tired. "We need to talk about your transition plan." Transition plan. It was a nice, clean, bureaucratic term for what was really happening. I was being moved again, for the last time. From the foster home I'd been in for 2 years, the closest thing to stable I'd known, to a transitional group home for boys who were about to age out. A holding pen before they opened the gate and pushed you into the world, ready or not. I wasn't ready. I said nothing. I'd learned a long time ago that saying what you really felt didn't change the paperwork. He sighed, a sound I knew well. It was the sound of a good man trapped in a bad system. "It's not my decision, Leo. You know how it is. You're turning 18 in a year. The state requires this step. It's meant to prepare you for independent living." I stared at a water stain on the ceiling tile above his head. It looked like a ghost. Prepare me. They were going to prepare me by taking away the only people who remembered what I liked for breakfast, and putting me in a dorm with a dozen other angry, scared kids who were all counting down the days until they were officially nobody's problem. "The Millers are good people," I said, my voice quiet. It was the most I could manage. "I know they are," Henderson said, and for a second he sounded genuinely sorry. "They wanted to keep you. They fought for it. But the regulations—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the stacks of manila folders that seemed to be holding his office walls up. Regulations. The word was a wall. You could beat your fists against it until they were bloody, and the wall wouldn't feel a thing. I just nodded. The fight was already over, and I hadn't even been invited to it. My life was a series of closed-door meetings. He cleared his throat and slid a small cardboard box across the desk. It was the size of a shoebox, sealed with yellowing tape. "This is the last of your mother's personal effects. It's been in storage at the county records office. It officially transfers to you on your 17th birthday. Legally, it's yours now." My mother's things. I hadn't seen anything of hers since the day they took me. Just the clothes I was wearing and a worn photograph I kept hidden in my sock drawer. I reached out and touched the box. It was light, too light. How could a whole life be so light? "That's it?" I asked. "I'm afraid so," he said. "There wasn't much left in the apartment after she was gone. After the landlord cleared everything out. After my world had been wiped clean." I pulled the box into my lap. It felt both hollow and incredibly heavy at the same time. The finality of it was suffocating. This little box was the period at the end of the sentence of my childhood. Henderson stood up, a signal that our time was over. "A car will be here in an hour to take you to the Kenwood facility. Pack your things. And Leo—" He paused, and this time he did meet my eyes. His were filled with a weary sort of kindness that was almost harder to take than the indifference. Try to see this as a new chapter, not just an ending. I gave him another empty nod, picked up the box, and walked out of the office, the smell of stale coffee following me down the hall. A new chapter. It felt more like the book was being slammed shut. I didn't know it then, but he was right. It was a new chapter, and the key to unlocking it was sitting right inside that flimsy cardboard box, waiting for me. The Kenwood Transitional Living Facility was exactly what I expected. Cinder block walls painted a pale institutional green, the air smelling of boiled vegetables and simmering resentment. My room was a small cube with a metal frame bed, a desk, and a lock. My roommate, a guy named Marcus with a chip on his shoulder the size of a brick, took one look at me, grunted, and turned back to his phone. Home sweet home. I spent the first few days in a fog, going through the motions. Mandatory life skills classes on budgeting the money we didn't have. Group therapy sessions where no one said a word. The endless, crushing boredom of waiting for your life to start while feeling like it was already over. I kept my mother's box on the desk, unopened. I was afraid of what was inside, but more than that, I was afraid of what wasn't. Afraid of the confirmation that there was nothing left of her, nothing left for me. Finally, one night, when the silence of the room was louder than the noise in the hallway, I couldn't stand it anymore. I sat on my bed and carefully peeled back the brittle tape. The cardboard lids sighed open. Inside, there was a thin layer of dust and a handful of objects. A small, tarnished, silver locket with no chain and no pictures inside. A dog-eared paperback copy of a book I didn't recognize. A few faded photographs. My mom as a teenager, smiling and squinting in the sun. A picture of me as a baby, wrapped in a blanket. A grainy photo of a man I didn't know standing in front of a barn. And at the bottom, two things. A single, heavy, old-fashioned brass key, and a folded, tri-colored piece of paper. It was a bill of sale, the old kind with carbon copies. The paper was brittle, and the typewritten letters were faint. I unfolded it carefully. At the top it read, J.D. Hemmings Farm and Implement. The date was 20 years ago. The item sold. 1/1/1953 Case Model 500 Tractor, Diesel, as is. And the price, circled in red pen, $75. The buyer was my grandfather, a man I'd never met. He had died before I was born. The seller was someone named Al, paid in full, $75, for a tractor. It was the strangest, most useless thing I could imagine. Why would my mom have kept this? It wasn't sentimental. It was a receipt. I looked at the picture of the man in front of the barn again. He was lean, weathered, wearing overalls and a cap. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes looked kind. Was this my grandfather? Was that his barn? I turned the photo over. Faint pencil handwriting, almost completely faded, read, Robert, before the sale. The sale. The tractor. It felt like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. For the next week, that bill of sale became my obsession. In the facility's computer lab, I didn't look for jobs or apartments like I was supposed to. I looked up 1953 Case Model 500. It was a beast, a big, orange, powerful-looking machine. People on farming forums called it a workhorse, a legend. They posted pictures of their restored models, gleaming and proud. Mine, or my grandfather's, I guess, had been sold for $75. A scrap price. That meant it was probably a wreck, a pile of rust. So why keep the receipt? Why was this scrap of paper in the box with the locket and the baby pictures? And why the key? It didn't look like a house key. It was ornate, heavy, a skeleton key. It didn't fit anything I owned. I held it in my palm, its cold weight a solid, tangible mystery in a life that was becoming more abstract by the day. The thought started as a whisper, a crazy, illogical whisper in the back of my mind. The tractor. I had to find the tractor. It was the only thing I had. Not a memory, not a photo, but a physical object that connected me to a past I didn't know. It was a ridiculously stupid idea, a wild goose chase, but it was also the only thing that made me feel anything other than numb. It was a purpose, a direction. Even if it led to a field of weeds and a pile of rust, it was a place to go. I looked at the photograph of my grandfather again. On the back, below his name, was something else I hadn't noticed before. It was so faint. A rural route number and a town name. Canaan Creek. I'd never heard of it. I typed it into the search bar. It was a tiny dot on the map, hundreds of miles away. A place in the middle of nowhere. A place where a man might have owned a farm. A place where a $75 tractor might still be sitting, waiting. The whisper grew louder. Go. The last few months at the Kenwood facility blurred into a monotonous cycle of waiting. Every day felt the same. The same bland food, the same hollow conversations, the same four walls of my room. Marcus and I had settled into a silent truce, two ships passing in the night in a room too small for both of us. The only thing that kept me going was my secret plan. During my mandated vocational research time in the computer lab, I wasn't looking up trade schools. I was mapping bus routes. Canaan Creek was not an easy place to get to. It involved 3 transfers and a final leg on a regional line that only ran twice a week. It would take every penny I had saved from my mandatory part-time job washing dishes, the pittance the state called my Independence Fund. I'd have just enough for the one-way ticket and maybe $100 to spare. It was a reckless, insane gamble. Mr. Henderson called me into his office a month before my 18th birthday. The water stain on the ceiling was still there, maybe a little bigger. "Leo, we need to finalize your exit plan," he said, his tone more urgent than usual. "Have you found a place to live? Have you applied for any of the housing assistance programs?" I stared at my hands. I had filled out none of the forms. I had made none of the calls. My exit plan was a bus ticket to a town I'd never seen and a half-baked hope of finding a broken-down tractor. I couldn't tell him that. He'd think I was crazy. He'd probably try to stop me, to have me evaluated. The system didn't like loose ends, and I was about to become the loosest end imaginable. "I'm working on it," I lied. The words tasted like ash. He leaned forward, his elbows on the cluttered desk. "Leo, this isn't a game. On your 18th birthday, the support stops. That's it. You'll be on your own. You need a plan, a real one." I knew he was right. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me that this was a terrible idea. I should be finding a roommate, a cheap apartment, a full-time job at a fast food joint. That was the path. That was survival. But my heart, or whatever was left of it, was clinging to that bill of sale and that brass key. It was the only inheritance I had. "I have a lead on a place," I said, the lie getting bigger. "With some family, out of state." Henderson's eyebrows shot up. "Family? We have no record of any extended family, Leo. Your mother was an only child, and your grandparents are deceased. Distant family, I mumbled. A cousin of my grandfather's. I've been in touch. It was a flimsy story, and he looked at me with deep suspicion. But what could he do? I was almost 18. He couldn't force me to stay. He could only advise me. "Be careful, son," he said, his voice dropping. "People you don't know. You can't always trust them. If this doesn't work out, you call me. You hear me? You call this office. There are emergency shelters, resources." I nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. He was trying to help. He was a good man, and I was lying to his face and about to walk off a cliff. The day I turned 18 was gray and drizzly. There was no cake, no party, just a final meeting with a new social worker I'd never met before, a woman who handed me an envelope with my last check and a list of homeless shelters. She shook my hand, wished me luck, and pointed me toward the door. And that was it. 6 years in the system, and it ended with a handshake and a map to a cot. I walked out of the Kenwood facility with a single duffel bag on my shoulder and the cardboard box under my arm. The drizzle felt like it was washing the last 6 years off me. I was free, and I was terrified. I walked to the bus station, the city streets looking alien and hostile. I bought my ticket, the numbers on the screen dwindling my life savings down to almost nothing. The bus hissed and groaned as it pulled into the bay. It was old, the seats were vinyl and cracked, and it smelled of diesel fumes and stale air freshener. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I found a seat by the window, put my duffel bag on the seat next to me, and held the box in my lap. As the bus pulled away from the station, I watched the city skyline recede until it was just a smudge on the horizon. The landscape slowly began to change. Grimy industrial parks gave way to sprawling suburbs, which then melted into strip malls, and finally into open fields. The buildings got smaller, the spaces between them wider. The sky seemed to get bigger. We drove for hours. I watched farms roll by, with their silos and barns and rows of crops. I saw tractors in the fields, modern green and red ones, crawling along the earth. I wondered if any of them were like mine, if my orange ghost was still out there. We stopped in small towns with names like Harmony and Pleasant Valley. People got on and off, carrying grocery bags or luggage, their faces etched with the quiet dramas of their own lives. No one looked at me twice. I was just another person in transit, just another person going somewhere. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was the one driving. I wasn't being sent or moved or placed. I was going. The final transfer was in a town that was little more than a gas station and a diner. The bus that pulled up was even smaller, more like a shuttle van. I was one of only 3 passengers. The driver, an old man with a kind, wrinkled face, nodded at me. "Where are you headed, son?" "Canaan Creek," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Not much out that way anymore. You visiting someone?" "Something like that," I said. The last leg of the journey was on narrow country roads that wound through dense forests and rolling hills. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields. It was beautiful and lonely. When the bus finally stopped, it was in front of a single, shuttered building with a faded sign that read, Canaan Creek General Store. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "This is it, son. End of the line." I grabbed my bag and the box and stepped out. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing around a bend, leaving me in a profound and ringing silence. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine. There were no streetlights, No other cars. No sounds but the chirping of crickets. I was completely and utterly alone. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a beginning. The general store looked like it had been closed for a decade. The windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling in long, curling strips. Across the road, there was a small white church with a leaning steeple and a handful of houses scattered down a dirt lane. That was it. That was Canaan Creek. There was no one to ask for directions. My phone had no signal. I was standing at a crossroads in the middle of nowhere, with darkness falling fast. I felt a surge of panic. This was a mistake. A stupid, childish fantasy. What was I thinking? I should have stayed in the city. I should have gotten a job. I almost sat down on the steps of the old store and just gave up. But then my fingers brushed against the brass key in my pocket. The solid, cold weight of it. It was real. The tractor was real. My grandfather was real. I had to see it through. I pulled out the old photograph. The rural route number was my only clue. I picked a road at random and started walking, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The road was unpaved, and my city sneakers were not made for the gravel and dirt. The sky was a deep, star-dusted indigo, brighter than any sky I had ever seen. The silence was broken by the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of my footsteps. I walked for what felt like hours. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every rustle in the woods made me jump. I passed a few mailboxes, their numbers rusted and faded, but none of them matched. I was tired, hungry, and my hope was starting to fray. Just as I was about to turn back, I saw it. A rusted, dented mailbox, tilted on its post, half hidden by overgrown weeds. I wiped the grime away with my sleeve. The numbers were barely visible, but they matched. This was it. I looked down the lane it marked. It was less a road and more of a suggestion. 2 dirt ruts disappearing into a tunnel of overgrown trees. It looked dark and unwelcoming. Taking a deep breath, I turned and started down the lane. The branches of the trees scraped at my arms. The air grew cooler, damper. After about a quarter of a mile, the trees opened up, and I saw it. A clearing, bathed in moonlight. In the center stood the silhouette of a house. It was a classic old farmhouse, 2 stories with a wraparound porch, but it was in a terrible state of disrepair. The roof was sagging in the middle, windows were broken, and the porch railings were gone. To its left was the skeleton of a barn. It had collapsed in on itself, a chaotic jumble of weathered wood and rusted metal roofing. The whole place looked haunted, forgotten by time. My heart sank. This was it? This ruin? This was the legacy I had chased across the state. I walked slowly toward the house, my feet sinking into the overgrown lawn. The place was utterly silent. It felt like a tomb. I stepped onto the porch, the floorboards groaning in protest under my weight. I reached the front door. The paint was gone, weathered down to the bare, gray wood. With a trembling hand, I pulled the heavy brass key from my pocket. It looked ancient, like it belonged to a castle. I pushed it into the keyhole. It slid in perfectly. I turned it. There was a loud, grating click that echoed in the night air. The lock had engaged. I turned the knob, pushed, and the door swung inward with a long, mournful creak. A wave of stale, musty air washed over me. The smell of dust, decay, and trapped time. I stood on the threshold, peering into the darkness within. I couldn't see anything. Using the flashlight on my phone, I swept a beam of light across the room. It was a living room. Furniture, a sofa, An armchair, a coffee table, was still in place, but everything was draped in thick, white shrouds of dust cloths, making them look like a family of ghosts. Cobwebs as thick as cotton candy hung from the ceiling. I took a step inside. My footstep on the hardwood floor was an explosion in the silence. I was trespassing in the past. Slowly, methodically, I explored the ground floor. The dust motes danced in my flashlight beam like tiny stars. In the dining room, a long table was set with plates and glasses, all under a thick blanket of dust, as if the family had just vanished in the middle of preparing for a meal. The kitchen was a nightmare of peeling linoleum and rusted appliances. A calendar on the wall was turned to August, 20 years ago, the day everything stopped. I went upstairs, the steps creaking so loudly I was sure they would collapse. There were 2 bedrooms. The first one was simple, with a single bed and a dresser. The second one, the master bedroom, felt different. The air was heavier. A large 4-poster bed dominated the room. On the nightstand, a pair of reading glasses sat next to a book, as if the owner had just set them down and would be back any minute. This must have been my grandparents' room. I felt a profound sense of sadness. This place wasn't just abandoned, it was a place of sudden loss. It wasn't a home that had been left, it was a home that had died. After exploring the house, I knew I couldn't spend the night inside. It felt too much like sleeping in a grave. I went back outside and sat on the porch steps, my back against a post. The adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and a hollow ache in my chest. The reality of my situation crashed down on me. I was 18 years old, alone, with less than $100 to my name, sitting on the porch of a derelict house hundreds of miles from anyone who even knew I existed. The grand adventure had led to this, a dead end. I thought about my mom. Had she ever been here? Did she grow up in this house, run through these fields? The woman in the photographs, the one with a bright, squinting smile, seemed like she could have. But the woman I remembered from the end of her life, the tired, sad woman who could barely get out of bed, she didn't belong here at all. What happened in between? As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, my eyes were drawn to the collapsed barn. The tractor. I had almost forgotten. I got up, my joints stiff from the cold, and walked over to the ruin. The roof had caved in completely, and massive wooden beams lay crisscrossed over a pile of rubble. It looked impassable, but I had to know. I started climbing carefully over the debris, testing each foothold. Splintered wood and sharp pieces of rusted tin tore at my clothes and hands. And then I saw it. Underneath a massive central beam and a tattered, rotten tarp, I could see a curve of metal, a fender. And it was orange, a deep, faded, rust-pocked orange. It was the case. It was real. It was there. A surge of something, not quite hope, but something like it, went through me. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how I would survive the day, let alone the week. But for the first time, I felt like I was in the right place. I had found the beginning of the story. Now I just had to figure out how to read it. The morning sun revealed the full extent of the decay. The farm was a wreck, but it had good bones. The house was solid, despite the sagging roof. The land, though overgrown, was beautiful, rolling down to a small creek at the edge of the property. But my focus was on the tractor. It was buried. Getting to it would be a massive job. I needed tools. I spent the morning searching the less collapsed parts of the barn and a few small sheds behind the house. I found a treasure trove of rust, an old axe with a loose head, a shovel, a pry bar, and in a small, weather-tight shed that had miraculously survived, a set of old wrenches and a hammer. It was enough. The first task was to get the huge roof beam off the tractor. It was at least a foot thick and 20 feet long, impossibly heavy. I tried to lift one end. It didn't budge. I spent an hour trying to lever it up with the pry bar, grunting and sweating, but I couldn't get enough purchase. I was failing at my first real test. Defeated, I sat on a pile of rubble, my hands raw and bleeding. This was impossible. I was a city kid who knew how to wash dishes, not a farmer who knew how to move timbers. I was about to give up for the day when I remembered something I'd seen in the back of one of the sheds. An old, heavy-duty car jack. The kind you had to pump. It was greasy and rusted, but it looked like it might still work. I dragged it over to the beam. I found a solid piece of ground underneath one end and positioned the jack. I started pumping the handle. It was stiff, and it screeched in protest. But then, slowly, miraculously, the beam began to lift. An inch. Then 2. It was working. I scrambled to find rocks and solid blocks of wood to shove under the rising beam, creating a crib. I'd lift it a few inches, jam more support under it, then reposition the jack and do it again. It was grueling, painstaking work. It took the rest of the day. My back ached, my muscles screamed, and I was covered in grime and sweat. But as the sun began to set, the beam was finally high enough. I gave it one last mighty shove, and it rolled off the supports and crashed to the ground beside the tractor. I had done it. I stood there, panting, looking at my prize. The tractor was more exposed now. It was in rough shape. The tires were flat and rotted. The engine was covered in a thick cake of greasy dirt and rust. The seat was just a rusted metal pan, the padding long gone. But it was all there. It was a complete machine. And then I saw something that made my heart beat faster. On the side of the tractor, just below the driver's seat, was a small metal box. It wasn't a standard part of the machine. It had been welded on, a custom addition. And it had a heavy-duty padlock on it. A toolbox, but a very, very secure one. Why would you weld a toolbox to a tractor and put a padlock on it? My mind started racing. This had to be it. This was the reason for the bill of sale, the reason my mom had kept it. This was the secret. Getting the lock off was my new obsession. I tried the brass key from the house, but it was the wrong shape. I tried hitting the lock with the hammer, but it just dented the metal. I needed to break it. I found the pry bar again. I wedged the tip into the hasp of the lock and put all my weight on it. The metal groaned. I pulled and strained, my muscles burning. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, with a sharp, explosive crack, the hasp snapped. The lock fell to the ground. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid of the box. I was expecting... I don't know what I was expecting. Money? A weapon? Some kind of treasure? But it was none of those things. Inside, nestled in a bed of what looked like oilcloth, was another metal box, like a small file box. This one wasn't locked. I lifted it out. It was heavy. I sat down on the tractor's huge rear wheel and placed the box on my lap. I took a deep breath and opened the lid. Inside, there were no jewels, no gold, just paper. A stack of thick, cream-colored envelopes, each one sealed with wax and numbered in neat black ink. There were 10 of them, and on top of the stack was a single, unnumbered letter. The envelope just said, "For my grandson." My hands trembled so badly I could barely pick it up. My grandson. He knew. He had somehow known, 20 years ago, that I would be here. that I would find this. I broke the wax seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was strong and clear. If you are reading this, then a great many things have gone wrong. And one thing at least has gone right. You found your way home. My name is Robert, and I was your grandfather. I'm sorry I never got to meet you. I'm writing this because there are things you need to know about your mother, about this farm, and about the choice you now have to make. Read the letters in order. They will explain everything. Do not read them all at once. Read one, and then think. The story they tell is not an easy one, but it is the truth, and the truth is all I have left to give you. Your loving grandfather. I sat there in the ruins of the barn, the setting sun casting long orange stripes through the broken slats, and I held the letter in my hand. A message from a ghost who knew my name. I picked up the envelope marked with a number 1. The truth is all I have left to give you. I broke the seal. The first letter was dated just a few weeks after the bill of sale for the tractor. The ink was slightly faded, but the handwriting was firm, resolute. My dearest Sarah, it began. Sarah, my mother. He was writing to her. But she was gone. These letters were for me now. My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, I am gone. I have the doctor's word on it, and a man knows his own body. There isn't much time, and there is so much I have failed to say. I am writing this because I have made a decision about the farm, and I know you will not understand it. You will likely hate me for it. I hope one day you can forgive me. I have sold the farm. The words hit me like a physical blow. He sold it. This place, this home, it wasn't ours. It had never been mine. The entire trip, the hope I had been nurturing, it was all based on a lie. I was just a squatter in a stranger's derelict house. I felt a hot surge of anger and betrayal. Why lead me here? Why build up this mystery just to reveal this? I kept reading, my anger making the words swim. I know what you are thinking. I know you love this place, but you cannot manage it, my girl. Not now. The debts are too high, and the fight has gone out of you. And I know why. I am not as blind as you think. I have seen the slips from the track. I have heard the late-night phone calls from men with rough voices asking for money. I know about the gambling. I am not angry. I am heartbroken. It is a sickness, Sarah, an illness like the one in my own lungs. It is not a moral failing, but it is a fact. And I cannot leave this land, our family's legacy, to be devoured by that sickness. I had to stop reading. My head was spinning. Gambling? My mother? The quiet, sad woman I remembered? The woman who could barely afford groceries. It didn't make sense. But as I thought back, small, confusing memories started to click into place. The times she would be ecstatically happy for no reason, followed by weeks of deep depression. The strange men who would sometimes knock on our apartment door. Men she would never let inside. The way she would obsess over lottery numbers. It had been a part of my life I had never understood, a background noise of chaos. My grandfather knew. He saw it all. I picked up the letter again. So I have sold the farm. But this is what you must understand. I have not sold it to a stranger. I have sold it to a holding company, a legal entity I created myself, with one single unbreakable clause in the contract. A buyback option. For a period of 25 years, the farm can be repurchased by you or your direct heir for the exact price I sold it for. Not a penny more. The money from the sale is not for you to have. I'm sorry, my girl, but I cannot give it to you. The sickness would take it. Instead, I have hidden it. It is safe. It is waiting. This farm is not gone. It is in hibernation. It is waiting for you to get well. Or, if the worst should happen, it is waiting for your son. Me. He was talking about me. I was a baby when he wrote this. My grandfather hadn't abandoned his daughter. He hadn't sold off their legacy. He had tried to save it. He had created a financial time capsule, a firewall to protect the family home from his daughter's illness. An illness he had the grace to call a sickness, not a sin. It was a desperate, complicated, and deeply loving act, and it had failed. My mother never got well. She never read these letters. She never knew the farm was waiting for her. She died in a cheap apartment in the city, and the secret died with her, buried in a cardboard box. Until now. I sat there as darkness fell around me, the single sheet of paper trembling in my hands. The anger was gone, replaced by a wave of grief so profound it felt like I was drowning. I cried. I cried for the grandfather I never knew, a man who saw everything with such painful clarity and tried to build a lifeboat. I cried for my mother, for the sickness that had stolen her life and this beautiful inheritance from her. And I cried for myself, the boy who had grown up an orphan, believing he had nothing and no one, while this whole time a future was sitting here, waiting, locked in a metal box. This is the point in the story where everything changes, where the past isn't what you thought it was, and the future becomes a terrifying, wide-open question. And I want to pause here for a second and talk to you. If you've made it this far, thank you. This isn't an easy story to tell. I know there are people watching this who have had a moment like this in their own lives, a moment where you uncover a family secret, a hidden truth that rewrites your entire history. It can be a painful, disorienting thing. It can make you feel completely alone. But I want you to know that you're not. The comments on this channel are filled with people who have walked through fire and come out the other side. If this story is hitting a nerve with you, if it's bringing something up, I want you to feel welcome to share it below. You don't have to share details, just the feeling, just to say, I get it. Because this community is built on that understanding. We're all just trying to make sense of the stories we've been given. Okay, let's get back to it. Back to that dark, collapsed barn and the choice I was about to face. The next few days were a blur. I survived on the few granola bars I had left and water from a spigot I found behind the house that, miraculously, still worked. I slept on the porch, wrapped in the dusty dust cloths from the living room furniture. I was too overwhelmed to do anything else. The weight of my grandfather's letters was immense. He hadn't just given me a history, he had given me a responsibility. I read the second letter. It was more practical. It detailed the name of the lawyer who had set up the holding company and the buyback agreement. A man in a town about 50 miles away. A man who was likely long retired or dead by now. It was another cold trail. But the third letter was the one that changed everything. Sarah, it read, or my grandson, if it is you who is reading this. A choice is not a choice without the means to make it. The farm is waiting, but the world runs on money. I sold this land for $150,000. A pittance even then, but it was the best I could do in a hurry. That money is the seed. With it, you can buy back this land and have enough left over to begin again. To buy seed, to fix the barn, to live for a year while you bring the earth back to life. But you have to find it first. I could not risk putting it in a bank. I could not risk leaving it in the house. It had to be somewhere safe. somewhere only someone who knew this land would look. My heart started to pound. He was going to tell me where it was. "I've thought long and hard about this," the letter continued. "A map is too easily found. A simple description, too easily guessed. It has to be a riddle, a key that only fits the mind of someone who belongs here. So here it is. The house watches the sun rise. The barn watches it set. But the heart of the farm is not in the house or the barn. It is in the foundation that joins them, in the place where the first light of morning kisses the western wall. Go there at dawn. The shadow will show you the way." I read the riddle a dozen times. Where the first light of morning kisses the western wall. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale. The western wall of what? The house? The barn? He said the foundation that joins them. I spent the rest of the day pacing the property, trying to decipher it. The house faced east. The barn, what was left of it, faced west. The foundation that joins them. There was no physical foundation joining them, just 50 yards of overgrown grass. It had to be a metaphor. I was exhausted, hungry, and my brain felt like mush. I couldn't solve it. I felt like I was failing his test. I decided to do the only thing I could, follow his instructions literally. I would wake up at dawn and watch. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I sat on the porch, my eyes fixed on the space between the house and the barn. As the sky began to lighten, a sliver of sun crested the trees behind the house. The first rays of light shot across the yard, and I saw it. The house cast a long, sharp shadow, and the barn, even in its ruined state, cast another. And for a few brief moments, the tip of the house's shadow touched the base of the barn's western wall. The shadow will show you the way. The shadow of the house was pointing, like a long, dark finger, to a specific spot on the barn's foundation. I ran to the spot. It was a section of the old fieldstone foundation, covered in moss and dirt. The shadow was pointing directly at one large, flat stone that looked no different from the others. I dug at the dirt around it with my bare hands, then used the pry bar. I wedged the tip into the seam and pushed. The stone was heavy, but it moved. It scraped backwards and then tilted into a cavity behind it. It was a loose stone, a hiding place. My hands were shaking again. I reached into the dark, cool space behind the wall. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was another box. This one was an old military-style ammunition can, heavy and solid. It wasn't locked. I lifted the latches on the side. The lid hissed as the seal broke. I lifted the lid. I think I stopped breathing. It was full of money. Stacks and stacks of old bills, bundled in paper bands. They were damp and smelled of earth and time, but they were real. Underneath the bundles of cash was a thick, waterproof oilcloth pouch. I opened it. Inside was a single, pristine legal document, the buyback agreement. All the legal paperwork, the deed, the terms, signed and notarized. I sat on the damp ground, the ammo can in my lap, and just stared. $150,000. To me, it might as well have been $1 billion. It was more money than I had ever imagined seeing in my life. And with it came the choice my grandfather had written about. It was stark and terrifyingly clear. I could take this money. I could walk away from this ruin, from Canaan Creek, from this whole ghost story. I could go to any city, get an apartment, buy a car, go to college. I could build a new life, a normal life, from scratch. No one would ever know. It would be easy. Or I could stay. I could use this money to do what he wanted. to honor the buyback agreement, to fight for this land, to pour this money and my life into this broken-down place, to try and resurrect a dream that had been dead for 20 years. It would be hard. It might even be impossible. I thought about the city, the noise, the anonymity, the feeling of being just another face in the crowd. I thought about the group home, about Mr. Henderson, about the endless cycle of just trying to survive. I had been running my whole life, running from the past, running from the memories, running toward a future that was always just a blank wall. For the first time, I had something to run to. I looked at the sagging roof of the house. I looked at the collapsed timbers of the barn. I looked at the overgrown fields stretching out before me. It wasn't just property. It was a legacy. It was a story. And it was my story. I closed the lid of the ammo can. I had made my choice. I was staying. The first call I made was to Mr. Henderson. I had to walk 2 miles down the road to get a single bar of cell service. But when I heard his voice, a wave of relief washed over me. "Leo, is that you? Where are you? Are you okay?" He sounded frantic. I told him everything. The house, the tractor, the letters, the money. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I thought he had hung up. "Mr. Henderson?" "I'm here, Leo," he said, his voice strained. "I'm just trying to process this. You found $150,000 in cash in a box hidden in a wall?" "Yes, sir," I said, "and the legal papers to buy back the farm." I could almost hear him shaking his head. "Leo, this is a minefield. You can't just walk into a bank with that much cash. And this buyback agreement is 20 years old. The holding company might not even exist anymore. Or it might be owned by someone who has no intention of honoring this." He was right. My moment of decisive clarity was already being clouded by the grim fog of reality. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a whole new fight. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice small. "You stay put," he said, his tone shifting from shocked to protective. "Don't talk to anyone. Don't spend a penny of that money. I'm going to make a call. I know a lawyer, a good one, who used to work with legal aid in the rural counties. She specializes in property and inheritance law. Her name is Ms. Albright. I'll see if she can help. But Leo, be careful. You're in a very vulnerable position." A week later, a dusty Subaru drove down my lane. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense haircut stepped out. This was Eleanor Albright. She didn't look like a lawyer. She wore hiking boots and a practical jacket. She took in the scene, the collapsed barn, the sagging house, me, looking like a wild boy who'd been living in the woods for a month, without a flicker of judgment. "Mr. Henderson sent me," she said, shaking my hand. Her grip was firm. "He said you had a story to tell." We sat on the porch steps, and I laid it all out for her. The letters, the ammo can, the deed. She listened intently, reading through my grandfather's letters and the legal agreement with a focused intensity. She examined the cash, the old bills, the paper bands. When I was finished, she was silent for a long time, just looking out at the overgrown fields. "Your grandfather was a very smart man," she said finally, "and a very complicated one. This agreement is ironclad, or it was. The holding company he created, Canaan Creek Holdings, was dissolved about 15 years ago. Its assets, including this property, were absorbed by a larger real estate investment firm." My heart sank. "So, it's over?" "No," she said, a small, determined smile playing on her lips. It's not over. The terms of this contract transfer with the asset. The new owners, a company called Lions Gate Development, are legally bound by this buyback clause. The problem is, they almost certainly don't know it exists, and they are not going to be happy when they find out. It turned out Lions Gate Development had big plans for Canaan Creek. They had been slowly buying up old, abandoned farmland in the area for years. Their plan was to build a luxury golf resort and gated community. My grandfather's 100 acres were right in the middle of their proposed layout. My derelict farm wasn't just a forgotten property, it was $1 million problem for them. Ms. Albright laid out the strategy. We would approach them quietly, present the agreement, and exercise the buyback option. Best case, they'd be annoyed, but would honor the contract to avoid a legal mess. Worst case, they'd fight it, and we'd end up in court for years. While the lawyers started their slow, careful dance, I started my own work. I couldn't just sit and wait. This place was my responsibility now. I used a small amount of the cash, what Ms. Albright called a reasonable living stipend, to buy supplies. I took the bus to the nearest town with a hardware store and a market. Walking into a store and buying food, tools, and new clothes felt surreal. The locals looked at me, this grimy kid with a backpack, with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. I bought a new axe, a heavy-duty saw, work gloves, boots. I bought canned food, bread, peanut butter, simple things, survival things. My first major project was the barn. It was a hazard. I spent weeks carefully deconstructing the collapsed section, salvaging every usable plank and beam. It was back-breaking labor. I learned how wood behaves, how to pull nails without splitting the board, how to stack and sort the lumber. Every day, I would work from sunrise to sunset, fueled by peanut butter sandwiches and a growing sense of purpose. My body ached in ways I never knew it could, but my mind was clear. The physical work silenced the noise, the doubt, the fear. Each salvaged board was a small victory. Each cleared section of the barn floor was a piece of the past I was reclaiming. And all the while, I worked on the tractor. It became my partner in this. In the evenings, by the light of a lantern, I would clean the engine, degrease the parts, and study the old, faded manual I had found in one of the sheds. I didn't know anything about diesel engines, but I learned. I read forums on the internet on my phone during my weekly trips to the signal spot on the road. I ordered parts, gaskets, filters, a new fuel line. The old farmers on the forums became my anonymous mentors. They answered my stupid questions with patience and encouragement. Slowly, piece by piece, the orange workhorse started to look less like a relic and more like a machine. It was a mirror of my own life. Taking something broken, rusted, and forgotten, and trying to make it run again. Months bled into one another. The autumn chill arrived, painting the trees in fiery reds and yellows. The legal battle with Lionsgate was heating up. They had responded to Ms. Albright's letter with a dismissive offer. $100,000 in cash for me to walk away and sign a non-disclosure agreement. It's hush money, Ms. Albright told me over the phone. They know your claim is valid, and they're trying to see how cheaply they can make you disappear. The offer was tempting. $100,000, free and clear. No fight, no work. Just an easy exit. For a day, I actually considered it. Life would be so much simpler. But then I looked at my hands. They were calloused and stained, no longer the soft hands of a city kid. I looked at the neatly stacked piles of salvaged lumber. I looked at the Case tractor, its engine half rebuilt. I had invested more than just time here. I had invested my hope. This wasn't just land anymore. It was my grandfather's last stand. It was my one chance at a real home. "Tell them no," I told Ms. Albright. "Tell them we'll see them in court." The phone went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good. I was hoping you'd say that. Now the real fight begins." The next day, a notice was posted on my front gate, a formal eviction order, claiming I was an illegal squatter. The battle was no longer just on paper. It was here, on my doorstep. The system, in a new and more menacing form, was trying to push me out again. But this time, I wasn't a scared kid in a social worker's office. This time, I was standing on my own ground, and I wasn't leaving. The winter came on hard and fast. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the farm in a thick layer of white silence. The eviction notice was a legal scare tactic, Ms. Albright had assured me, a way for Lionsgate to apply pressure. We filed a counterclaim, and the whole mess settled into the slow, grinding pace of the legal system. The court date was set for the spring. I had the winter to wait, to work, and to worry. Living in the farmhouse was no longer an option. With the broken windows and the hole in the roof, it was an icebox. I consolidated my life into one of the small, intact sheds, the one where I'd found the tools. It was barely bigger than my room at the group home, but it was mine. I insulated the walls with materials I salvaged from the barn, installed a small wood-burning stove I bought from an old farmer in the next town over, and it became my fortress against the cold. The loneliness was the hardest part. The days were short, the nights were long and dark. Some days, the only voice I heard was my own. The silence of the snow-covered landscape was immense, beautiful, but crushing. It gave me too much time to think. Doubts crept in like the cold drafts around the shed door. Was I crazy to be doing this? To be fighting a multi-million-dollar corporation? To be pinning all my hopes on a piece of land that had brought my family so much pain? My anchor through it all was the work, and my primary focus was the tractor. Getting it to run before the spring court date became my singular obsession. It was more than a machine. It was a symbol. If I could bring this dead thing back to life, then maybe I had a chance. Maybe this whole place had a chance. I spent every daylight hour that wasn't consumed by basic survival, chopping wood, melting snow for water, in the frigid, open-air workshop of the half-demolished barn. I had completely disassembled the engine. The parts were laid out on a wooden plank, cleaned and catalogued. I followed the manual like it was scripture. I replaced the piston rings, honed the cylinders, and lapped the valves. It was a slow, meticulous process. I learned to feel the difference between a properly torqued bolt and one that was too loose. I learned the smell of diesel and the feel of grease under my fingernails. One day, a pickup truck I didn't recognize pulled into the lane. An old man with a weathered face and kind eyes got out. I recognized him from the hardware store. He'd sold me the wood stove. "Saw your smoke," he said by way of introduction. "Figured I'd see what kind of fool was trying to winter over at the old Hemmings place." His name was Gus. He'd known my grandfather. "Robert was a good man," he said, looking around at the work I'd done. "Stubborn as a mule, but a good man. This place broke his heart." He looked at the disassembled engine of the case. He grunted. "A 500. Haven't seen one of those run in 30 years. What's the problem?" I told him I couldn't get the timing right on the injector pump. He spent the next 2 hours with me in the freezing cold, his gnarled fingers guiding mine, showing me the subtle marks on the gears I had missed. He didn't ask about my story. He didn't ask why I was there. He just helped. Before he left, he said,
Robert would be proud of you, son, trying to save this place. It's worth saving. He started coming by once or twice a week after that.
He'd bring a thermos of hot coffee and a piece of news from town, or just stand there and watch me work, offering quiet advice when I got stuck. He was my first friend in Canaan Creek. He was the first root I put down in this new soil. Finally, in late March, with the snow melting and the court date just weeks away, the day came. The engine was fully reassembled. The fuel lines were bled. The battery, a new one Gus had helped me get, was fully charged. It was time. Gus stood by, arms crossed, a nervous energy coming off him. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. The culmination of months of work, of hope, of freezing cold nights studying diagrams by lantern light. I climbed onto the rusted metal seat. I took a deep breath. I turned the key. The starter groaned, a low, protesting sound. The engine turned over once, twice, a heavy, sluggish rotation. It coughed. A puff of black smoke shot out of the exhaust pipe. And then, nothing. Silence. My heart plummeted. All that work, for nothing. Wait, Gus said. Let the glow plugs warm up longer. Try again. I waited a full minute, my hand shaking on the key. I tried again. The starter whined. The engine turned. It coughed again, and then, with a thunderous roar that echoed across the valley, it caught. The whole machine shuddered to life, vibrating with a deep, powerful rhythm. It was running. The sound was deafening, glorious, the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I let out a whoop of pure joy. Gus had a huge grin on his face. The tractor was alive, and so was I. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the steady, thrumming idle of the engine, feeling the power of it vibrate through my entire body. My grandfather's tractor. It had been sitting here silent for 20 years, and I had brought it back. I looked out over the fields, still brown and dormant from the winter. But now, I didn't see a wasteland. I saw a future. I had the tool. I had the will. I had the land. Now I just had to win the fight to keep it. The day of the court hearing was bright and cold. I wore the best clothes I had, a clean pair of jeans and a button-down shirt I'd bought at the town's only clothing store. Ms. Albright picked me up in her Subaru. I was so nervous I felt sick. My entire future was going to be decided in a sterile, wood-paneled room by a judge who didn't know me or my story. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her eyes on the road. "Terrified," I admitted. "Good," she said. "That means you understand what's at stake. Just remember, you have the truth on your side, and a very stubborn lawyer." The courtroom was intimidating. The lawyers for Lionsgate were a team of 3, all in expensive suits, carrying shiny leather briefcases. They looked at me with open disdain, like I was something they'd scraped off their shoe. Their lead counsel argued first. He painted a picture of me as an opportunistic squatter, a delinquent who had stumbled upon an old, expired document and was trying to extort a respectable company. He called my grandfather's letters hearsay, and the buyback agreement a legal relic with no standing. He made me sound like a criminal. I could feel the judge's gaze on me, skeptical and impatient. When it was Ms. Albright's turn, she was calm and methodical. She didn't use flashy language. She just laid out the facts. She presented the original agreement. She explained the law of contracts, how the obligations transferred with the sale of the asset. She put the ammo can on the table and described how I had found it, how I had followed my grandfather's 20-year-old instructions. Then She called me to the stand. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The opposing lawyer's cross-examination was brutal. He twisted my words. He brought up my time in the foster care system, trying to paint me as unstable, unreliable. So you, a 17-year-old with no permanent address, just happened to find a box with $150,000 and a fantasy story written by a dead man, and now you expect this court to believe you have a claim to a multi-million-dollar piece of development property? He sneered. I looked at Ms. Albright. She gave me a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Breathe. Tell the truth. It's not about the money, I said, my voice shaking slightly, but clear. And it's not just property. It's my home. It's the only one I've ever had. I told them about the tractor. I told them about spending the winter in the shed, about rebuilding the engine in the cold. I told them about Gus. I told them about what it felt like to stand on that land and feel like I belonged somewhere. I wasn't making a legal argument. I was just telling my story. When I was done, the courtroom was silent. The judge, a stern-faced woman who hadn't shown a flicker of emotion, looked down at me from her high bench. She looked at the lawyers from Lionsgate. Then she looked at the papers in front of her. I have reviewed the contract drawn up by Mr. Robert Hemmings, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. It is unorthodox. It is unusual. But it is also legally sound. She looked directly at the lead counsel for Lionsgate. Your company bought the asset. You bought the obligations that came with it. The buyback clause is valid. The petition to evict is denied. The court orders you to honor the agreement and transfer the deed to Mr. Leo Vance upon receipt of the agreed-upon sum. It was over. Just like that. A few quiet sentences, and the fight was won. I just sat there, stunned. Ms. Albright put a hand on my shoulder. We did it, Leo, she whispered. We had won. The farm was mine. The drive back to Canaan Creek was quiet. I was in a daze. When we pulled into my lane, I saw something that made my breath catch. Gus's pickup truck was there, and so were 3 other trucks. A half-dozen people, farmers from the surrounding area, people I'd only seen in town, some I didn't recognize at all, were standing in my yard. Gus had told them the news. As I got out of the car, they started to clap. A slow, steady applause. Gus walked over and clapped me on the back, a huge grin on his face. Welcome home, son, he said. I looked at their faces, these strangers who were my neighbors. I looked at the house, the barn, the fields, and for the first time, the ache of loneliness I had carried with me my whole life was gone. I wasn't alone anymore. The next day, the work began in earnest, but I wasn't doing it by myself. Gus showed up with 2 of his sons. One of them was a carpenter. They spent the day helping me assess the barn, drawing up plans to rebuild it. Another neighbor, who owned a small sawmill, offered me a good price on lumber. The community, the one I never knew I had, was showing up for me. That spring, I fired up the Case 500, hitched an old plow I'd bought from Gus to the back of it, and I broke ground. The engine roared, the diesel smoke plumed into the clear blue sky, and the plow bit into the rich, dark earth. The land had been dormant for 20 years, but it was fertile, ready, waiting, just like me. I wasn't just turning over soil, I was turning the page. I was planting roots. That was 2 years ago. The farm is different now. The barn is rebuilt, strong and sturdy, the new wood standing bright against the old weathered planks I salvaged. The house has a new roof and new windows. I still live in the small shed. It feels more like home. But the main house is slowly coming back to life, room by room. I have a small herd of cattle and a few dozen chickens. The fields that were overgrown with weeds are now planted with hay and corn. The Case 500 is my most trusted partner. It's still loud, it's still cantankerous, but every time I turn that key and hear that engine roar to life, I feel a connection to the man who bought it for $75. A man who put his faith in a broken-down machine and a grandson he would never meet. I never took the easy path. I didn't take the money and run. I chose the harder right over the easier wrong. And in doing so, I found something worth more than any amount of cash. I found a home. Not a house, but a home. I found a community. I found a purpose. My grandfather's letters are still in the metal box. I read them sometimes, especially when things get hard. His last letter is the one that I keep closest to my heart. My grandson, it reads, "If you have made it this far, if you have chosen to stay, then you have my heart and my respect. This land is not an inheritance to be spent. It is a responsibility to be carried. It will ask everything of you. It will break your back and test your spirit. But it will also heal you. It will teach you the rhythm of the seasons, the value of hard work, and the peace that comes from building something with your own two hands. It is my final gift to you, not the land, not the money, but the choice, the chance to build a life of meaning. Make me proud." And so, I'm here. I'm a farmer. I'm a steward of this land. I am the keeper of my grandfather's legacy. This story isn't about getting rich or finding a hidden treasure. It's about what inheritance really means. It's not about what we're given. It's about what we choose to do with it. It's about finding value in things that other people have thrown away. A broken-down tractor, a derelict farm, a lost kid from the system. It turns out none of them were beyond repair. They just needed someone to believe in them. And that brings me back to you. The reason I tell this story is because I know for a fact that there are people out there who feel like they've been thrown away. People who feel like they're standing at a dead end, with no inheritance, no legacy, and no home. If that's you, I want you to hear this. Your story isn't over. Your second chance might not be a farm in the middle of nowhere. It might be something smaller, quieter, but it's out there. Sometimes the most beautiful futures are built on the ruins of the past. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this community. If this story meant something to you, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment below. Tell me what home means to you. I read every single one. Because every story matters, and you are not alone.